Happy whatever day of the week it is. If I'm honest, I have lost track. Welcome back to Drinking by My Shelf. My name is Emma, and in this video I'm going to tell you about a bunch of amazing books that I have never told you about before. Or at least these are all books that I read before I started my booktube channel, so some of them I may have mentioned, but I've never properly reviewed these books for you. And this video today is being sponsored by Skillshare, which is this completely awesome online learning community. I'm sure you've heard of them before. They offer so many thousands of different creative classes. And the reason that I'm sitting here surrounded by my plants today is actually because the most recent Skillshare class I've been taking is called Plants at Home, Uplift Your Spirit and Space, which is taught by Christopher Griffin. I've really got obsessed with collecting plants over the last year. I now have a collection of 7 next to me now. They each have names. I love them all. I did have 2 more, but 2 of them died. That was before I started taking the class, and some of them have like quite dry leaves and stuff, so I'm not the best plant mum yet, but taking the class is definitely helping. So that just gives you an example of the amazing range of classes that they have, and it's a really great way to structure your time, especially right now. That's something we definitely need, and to set yourself like manageable, achievable goals. And it's also really cool because you get this like ready-made community of other people with similar interests, and a lot of the classes are about unlocking your creativity and learning how to use your voice as a force for good in the world. Or, you know, for a force for good for your plants. So thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. The first 1,000 people to use the link in my description box below will get a free trial of Skillshare Premium, and after that it's only around $10 a month. So, speaking of learning about new amazing things, it is time to learn about some amazing books that I haven't told you about before. So the first book, which I'm pretty certain I have never mentioned on this channel before, is The Luck of the Bodkins by P.G. Wodehouse. And I'm going to kind of extend this to say anything by P.G. Wodehouse is really high up there for me. P.G. Wodehouse is the author of the Jeeves and Wooster series. I actually grew up watching the TV show first, but then I did go back and read the stories, and they're just hilarious. And his sense of humour is so kind of my family's sense of humour. Everything is completely farcical. So there's Jeeves and Wooster, there's also the Blandings Castle series, which I loved, and this particular book, the reason I've chosen The Luck of the Bodkins to tell you about is because my memory of reading this book is that I was reading it on the way to my Cambridge interview. I interviewed there to study English. I did not get in. But I was reading Luck of the Bodkins on the way and just laughing out loud, absolutely loving it. And then when it came to my interview, the professor, whoever was interviewing me, asked me about what book I was reading at the moment, and I got very, very excited, and I think I even like squeaked. I was like, oh, I've been reading Luck of the Bodkins, and then just started like rambling on about it, and not in an English literature kind of way, just telling him how funny I thought it was. He seemed mostly uninterested in my story, and I didn't get into Cambridge, but that's fine. It was worth it because The Luck of the Bodkins is a really funny book. I don't actually remember the storyline specifically. It takes place on an ocean liner, so our main character is Monty Bodkin, and he is trying to win back his fiancée who's ended their engagement. But the whole thing is just completely absurd and farcical. Every single character is larger than life, completely eccentric. If you find me funny, and actually more specifically, if you find my dad funny, which I know a lot of you do, because every time he features in videos, you always comment saying how hilarious he is. He is kind of the modern embodiment of P.G. Wodehouse, so all of P.G. Wodehouse's books read like my dad could have written them. They're written in like the 1930s, and all of his characters I think are these very posh, ridiculous characters. And actually Argy, when he first moved over to England, he started reading the Jeeves and Wooster stories and was loving them, but it meant that when he was already kind of learning the differences between like American use of English and English use of English, he was like picking up these really, really hilarious old-fashioned turns of phrase from Jeeves and Wooster. So he'd be saying things like, I will biff you where you stand, and we'd be like, no, that one's not actually one we use. Also, why was he threatening to biff people so often? The next book I want to tell you about is Don't Ask Me Why by Tania Kindersley, and this is a book that I have mentioned before on Book Break, but I don't think I've ever talked about it on this channel. This was a book that I read as a teenager and became completely obsessed with. It was set at Oxford, which is where I always wanted to go. So it's funny that I just told you I interviewed for Cambridge. It was a moment of confusion. I did always want to go to Oxford, and this book was like Brideshead Revisited, set in the 80s. So it's about a group of Oxford University students, our main characters being two girls called Verge and Ash, who are best friends, and me and my best friend at school got completely obsessed with this book, and we started calling each other Verge and Ash. I forget which way round. I think she was Verge and I was Ash. Verge in the book is actually this very troubled character, so sorry that she had to be the troubled one. But the first half takes place at Oxford, where they have this group of friends who are all rather pretentious, but in a kind of wonderfully fun way. And they go around Oxford acting like they're in an Evelyn Waugh novel, and I absolutely loved it. And then the second half is set after they graduate and everything just seems to go wrong for them. The real world hits them really hard, and particularly for Verge, she has a really, really difficult time. And so it's a very sad book. I think I loved it so much because it really captured that feeling of being lost and not quite sure of your place in the world, and kind of the contrast between them at university when they have this really, really strong friendship group and this really strong identity they kind of create for themselves, suddenly being thrown into the real world and feeling completely lost and adrift, and realising that that identity that they'd created for themselves at university, there isn't really a place for that in the real world. So yeah, I loved it. I really want to reread it actually. I remember being very sad. And I recommend reading it with a friend and calling each other the names from the book, because we had fun doing that. This is in absolutely no order, by the way. It's just the order that I wrote them down. The 100-Year-Old Man Who Climbed Out the Window and Disappeared is a book I know I have talked about before. I've definitely mentioned this book, but I did read it before I had a booktube channel, and so I don't think I ever did a proper wrap-up review. This is a story translated from Swedish about a 100-year-old man who, on his 100th birthday, climbs out the window of his nursing home and vanishes. He decides to get on a train and just set off anywhere for an adventure. But he accidentally takes the wrong suitcase at the train station and suddenly finds himself with like £1 million worth of Swedish krona, is it? I think that's the currency. So very quickly, his storyline descends into complete chaos. He meets, again, a lot of larger-than-life, eccentric characters along the way. They end up committing a bunch of crimes they didn't really intend to commit. It's very slapstick. It's very, very funny. But at the same time, we are flashing back constantly to hear about our main character, whose name is Alan Carlson. We hear about his whole life leading up to this moment. And it's kind of a Swedish Forrest Gump in that he turns out to have been at basically every major historical event of the last 100 years, and turns out to have been like a very key player in it. This is a genuinely laugh out loud book. I actually made all of my family read it as well, and loved like hearing them burst out laughing and kind of guessing which point they'd just got to. I have seen the film and didn't think it was as good. I didn't think the film was as funny as the book is, so if you've also seen the film, don't let it put you off. I think this is absolutely brilliant. And this is the best of Jonasson's books that I've read. Everything I've read of his since then, I have enjoyed, but not quite as much as this first one, which was just a masterpiece. All My Friends Are Superheroes by Andrew Kaufman. This is a really hard video to film because a lot of these books I haven't read in like 10, 15, 20 years, so it's hard to review because I don't remember the plot. I just know that this is about our main character, whose name I just saw from the back is Tom, and all of his best friends are superheroes. But they're superheroes of just real life characteristics. So for example, his wife is the Perfectionist, that is her superhero name. And he had a girlfriend before who was called TV Girl, who just loved television. So they're just kind of real life characters, but presented as if that made them a superhero. But it is presented in like a magical way. So Tom's kind of magical power is that he becomes invisible, but it's sort of just a metaphor that his relationship is falling apart and his wife doesn't see him anymore. She sees right through him, but it's presented as if like he is literally invisible to her. It's a very short book. I remember it being very moving and very fun. The quote from the bookseller on the back says, "It's one of the saddest, funniest, strangest and most romantic books. Brilliant," which is exactly how I remember feeling when I read it. I might read it again like this very afternoon because it's so small. This very afternoon. That was a very formal kind of phrase. Here was a book that made me cry. The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry by Rachel Joyce. So this is about an old man who sets off from his house to go and post a letter to an old friend who I think he knows is ill. Yeah, I'm pretty certain it's to an old friend of his called Queenie, who he knows is very, very ill in hospital. He's like right in the south of England somewhere, she's in the north of England somewhere, and he writes her a letter. and sets off to post it. But when he gets to the post box, he feels like he still needs to keep walking a bit longer, so he'll just walk to the next post box and post it there. When he gets to that one, he's like, I actually just still feel like keeping on walking. And he just keeps walking, and he walks all the way up the country to go and see her. And you see on the back here a postcard that he writes her. I'm on my way. All you have to do is wait, because I'm going to save you, you see. I will keep walking, and you must keep living. And it's absolutely heartbreaking. He meets so many people along the way. A lot of people start walking with him. It becomes this unlikely pilgrimage, as it says. And I can't quite remember the relationship dynamics between all the characters. I know that there is this kind of strong connection between Harold and Queenie that he's walking to, but Harold is also married. He has a wife called Maureen, who he leaves behind. He just sets off without telling her where he's going. And the kind of renewal of their relationship is really important in the book as well. I remember this being one of those books that is just so moving that, I don't know if you guys get this, because I don't usually cry at books. It's very, very rare that a book will make me actually cry tears. Instead, I can get a very, very sore throat if I'm reading really sad books, because it's like that literal feeling of a lump in your throat just staying there for so long that it just starts to really hurt. And I remember getting this a lot from this book. Another book that seriously gave me that lump in my throat feeling is The Art of Hearing Heartbeats by Jan-Philipp Sendker. But I do want to say about this one that since having read it, I recently read some Goodreads reviews and saw quite a few disabled reviewers saying that they didn't like the portrayal of disability in this book. So it might not be the best representation there. I just remember 10 years ago when I read it, I loved it and found it very moving. It's about a love story between a blind boy and a disabled girl. So she can't walk and he can't see, but he has this kind of almost magical level of hearing, like literally you can hear heartbeats, which is unrealistic. But I remember loving it because it was written as this kind of fairy tale. It was very, very romantic and very sad because the story is told in kind of flashbacks between present day and the 1950s, the 1950s being when this love story happened, these two characters in Burma. So they're both Burmese, but we know that the boy immigrated to the US and got married there and had children there. And we're now kind of looking back on this secret love story from his past that his American family didn't know anything about. So obviously that's always a really sad setup, watching a love story develop when you know from the very beginning that these characters are going to be torn apart somehow, and we're just waiting to find out how that happens. So yeah, I remember finding it very moving, but I would look at like Own Voices reviews first. And while we're on potentially slightly problematic books, I've got here The Perpetual Astonishment of Jonathan Fairfax, which is another of those farcical, ridiculous stories that I seem to just really gravitate towards and love. This is a murder mystery comedy. So it's about a 17-year-old boy who gets asked for directions by a man wearing a balaclava, and then it turns out that man goes on to murder somebody, and he ends up getting swept up into this huge, very dramatic plot, but it's all completely ridiculous and very funny. The reason I say it's slightly problematic is there is a not great representation of a lesbian relationship in here, which is disappointing. You'll see what I mean if you read it. So basically I'll just say, don't get excited if you are thrilled to find that there is a lesbian relationship portrayed in here. Don't get too excited about it, because it's not great. But that aside, this book does have the level of ridiculousness that I love, and I guess you could say that the problematic portrayal of this relationship is in keeping with the overall ridiculous, implausible nature of the book. It's just a shame that representation is so hard to come by, so we really cling to it when we do find it. This is a book that I read right before I started BookTube, so you just missed out on hearing about this one. But I did at that point have a blog, which was called theeggplantemoji.com. I think it's still up, but I think I maybe lost the domain name, so it might be like archived on WordPress somewhere. But I wrote a review on there, so I will go while I'm editing, I'll go and search for that and link it below if I can find it. But this is The Secret Lives of Baba Sagis' Wives by Lola Shoneyin. So this is about a man called Baba Sagi who has 4 wives, and the most recent of the wives has not had any children, and he wants to find out why this is happening. And I found this book a really great combination of being very readable, quite light and funny, but also like really packs a punch. It's got elements of mystery. We get to hear the perspectives of all the different wives, and they each have their secrets, so there's a kind of page-turning aspect of it. And there's also, I found it a really interesting book. It gave me a lot to consider. So, for example, at one point, the Baba Sagis and his newest wife, I can't remember her name, go to a doctor, and the doctor is a more modern doctor who kind of was educated in the US, I believe, and finds the fact that Baba Sagis has 4 wives to be really backwards and really misogynistic. But it's very nuanced, this portrayal, because the doctor is actually shown to be quite ignorant himself, in the way that he is totally unable to consider a different way of living. So we do see that the relationship is misogynistic. Baba Sagis is not good to his wives, but it's not just this black and white issue of, oh, this tradition is so outdated, these people are so backwards, we just need to teach them the Western way. That perspective is also kind of made fun of a bit as well. So I remember it being a book that I really had to think about a lot. And another one that I read just before starting BookTube, so again, you just missed out on that one, is Luckiest Girl Alive by Jessica Knoll. And again, I'm pretty certain that I have actually mentioned this in videos before, because it was a book that I absolutely loved. I don't even know where to start with telling you what this book is about, because there are so many elements, and I didn't really know anything about what to expect when going into it, and so I would recommend that you have the same experience. All you need to know is it's about a young woman called Annie who has this perfect life that she's kind of crafted for herself. She's a slightly unlikable character at the beginning, although all the reviews that I read of this were saying that she's deliberately horribly unlikable, and I didn't find her that bad. She's just, she's very put together. I didn't think she was awful. The book takes place in the build-up to her wedding, but she gets invited by a producer to take part in a documentary about this incident that happened when she was a teenager, when she was at school. And so we slowly learn all of these things that happened to her, and there are just so many issues packed into this book. I could not put it down, literally could not put it down. Literally. I have just 3 more books to tell you about, and these are all ones that I read in my childhood. So we're going to go now in reverse order. So as a teenager, a book I was obsessed with and read multiple times is Feeling Sorry for Celia by Jaclyn Moriarty. And again, I do feel like I have mentioned this book before, but whatever, I want to tell you about it again because it's so good. So this is about a teenager called Elizabeth, and the whole book is told through letters, but there's a twist. Some of the letters are real letters that she's writing to various characters, including her best friend Celia, who has gone missing and no one knows where she is. Some of them are this one, notes written to Elizabeth, left on the fridge from her parents. And some of them are these fictional letters written to Elizabeth from these made up societies. So those are the ones that kind of explore all of her teenage insecurities. So she'll get a letter from the Society of Beautiful People telling her why she can't join their society, or a letter from the Cold Hard Truth Association making sure she's not getting any ideas about the boy that she fancies. I read this book about 1,000,001 times when I was a teenager, and I very much want to read it again. Jaclyn Moriarty has also written loads of other books that I've never read, which at this point is ridiculous because I was obsessed with this one. How did I not go and read any of her others? I think I'm going to go and order them right now. Celia kind of sucks as a character. She's not really there for most of the book, so she's literally a very absent best friend who doesn't really care about people's feelings, but you also you kind of love her. But Elizabeth, our main character, is a great character. She's very funny, and she meets these other friends along the way, so it's this wonderful, heartwarming, funny friendship teenage story. Then when I was even younger, I loved The Adventures of the Little Wooden Horse by Ursula Moray Williams. This book, just warning, if you read it, is absolutely heartbreaking. This is about a toy wooden horse who is created by a toy maker called Uncle Peter. But then they lose all of their money. I think people stop buying toys or something. I can't quite remember the setup. They lose all their money and Uncle Peter gets very ill. So the little wooden horse, who loves Uncle Peter very much, decides to set out and make his fortune. And literally everything that could go wrong goes wrong. I cannot bear it. It is the most relentlessly painful book to read. I don't understand how this was ever deemed appropriate for children, because even just thinking about it hurts me, physically hurts me, but I love it, like really love it. So my dad used to read this to me and my sister when we were children, and his dad used to read it to him when he was a child, and he would always say that his dad could never read the final page because it was just too emotional. He would get choked up and he wouldn't be able to like say the words, and then the same thing would happen. So when I was little, my dad would read this to us and he would get to the final page and like not be able to get through it. And obviously I do not have children, I haven't read this to anyone yet, but I already know that's going to be the same, because I remember once just telling my friends at school the story of it. I just like told them the plot in order, and when it got to telling them what happened at the end, I like choked up and was like, I actually can't say it out loud, I have to write it down. I just opened it at a random page and the heading was "The Little Wooden Horse Goes Down the Mine," and I really remember that episode. It's just like a series of episodes, each one worse than the one before it, but then there's elements of hope in it and then the hope is worse. I'm going to put that down there because I'm feeling a little fragile. And the final book I'm going to tell you about that I absolutely adored as a child. To be honest, The Adventure of the Little Wooden Horse and this book we probably read around the same time, but for some reason I think of this book as being like the earliest one I remember in my childhood, and that is The Castle of Adventure by Enid Blyton. Funnily enough, this is actually book 2, I think, in the adventure series. The first one is called The Island of Adventure, then there's The Castle of Adventure, then there's some other ones in the series, but it was really The Castle of Adventure that we loved so much. I don't even know if I ever read The Island. It's just a very lovely old-fashioned story about a group of friends, 2 boys, 2 girls, plus a parrot. They have a parrot called Kiki who says hilarious things, and they go off on an adventure. They find some smugglers in an old ruined castle. Parents in those days apparently were just like, yeah, that's fine. They say that they want to go and stay overnight in the castle to keep an eye out, and their parents are like, yeah, sure, sounds fun. So they go and do that. Like, absolutely no one is watching these tiny little children. And it is old-fashioned. You do get a lot of the boys will go and do the exploring and the girls will stay and make the picnic for lunch. So there is a lot of that going on. But it is a really charming, fun story with a character called Bill Smuggs. Smuggs short for smuggler. So you can't really go wrong with that. And again, my dad used to read this one to me, and actually read this one to me a lot more recently. About 6 years ago, again, like right before I started BookTube, I got my eyes lasered. I actually was starting, if you go to the very, very beginning of my channel when I used to do like Snapchat book reviews, there is a video that I posted on the day that I got laser surgery and I had to wear these like funny goggles and stuff. But anyway, my dad took me to the appointment and then took me home, and I had to keep my eyes shut for a few hours, so he just read me The Castle of Adventure while I lay there with my eyes shut, and it was a wonderful day. So there you go, that was a bunch of books that I absolutely adore that I've never properly talked to you about before. Do let me know if you have ever read any of those. And thank you again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Do click the link in my description if you want to get a free trial and maybe try out getting plants as lovely as my collection here. Do you want to hear all of their names? Because I will tell you. Their names are Basil, Thirsty, Cyril, Tiger Queen, Daphne, what are your names? Selfish, that one is called Selfish, and Sophie over there. I had another plant called Sophie, but it was one of the ones that died, and I thought that's a bad omen, so I named that one Sophie, and then Rest in Peace Bongo did die, and I haven't replaced him. Okay, you've probably switched off by now because literally no one asked me to tell you all of my plants' weird names, so I will see you next time!